Joining me now to talk about where things stand and what comes next is Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. He is the minority leader who leads the Democratic delegation in the House. He represents part of Brooklyn. Welcome back to the program. Good to see you.
Good to be on, Errol.
If I understand all of this right, there's a conclusion to this that involves you supplying some Democratic votes to help Republicans get over the finish line and avoid this historic default. About how many Democratic votes are going to be required, do you think, to make that happen?
Well, from the very beginning, we understood that any resolution that avoids default and makes sure that America pays our bills and prevents the economy from crashing would require bipartisan votes in both the House and in the Senate. Now, we believe that what President Biden has done is to negotiate a very strong resolution in a very difficult situation because this was a hostage-taking environment from the very beginning. Now, what President Biden has done is that he will avoid a default that would have adversely impacted millions of New Yorkers and everyday Americans all across the country, that he has secured a suspension of the debt ceiling into the early part of 2025, so we don't have to deal with this hostage-taking crisis again for the rest of this Congress. And then he's also protected Social Security, protected Medicare, protected Medicaid, protected veterans, protected the American people from the types of draconian cuts that the Republicans were trying to jam down the throats of the American people. So I think where that leaves us is that Republicans have a responsibility to deliver at least 2/3 of their caucus, in our view, which means around 150 votes. We're committed to making sure that America does not default, that we ensure that the legislation is successful on the House floor. But this is legislation that was negotiated by House Republicans exclusively with the Biden administration, and so they have a responsibility to deliver.
Okay. Now, the Speaker of the House who did do this negotiation, Kevin McCarthy, has a faction within his conference that has always been somewhat hostile, right? I mean, there was the 15 votes or whatever it was before he could even claim the Speaker's gavel. Some of them are now saying they will not vote for it under any circumstances, which, you know, I guess you just took us through the math of how that's going to probably end up. But then some of them are also talking about a motion to vacate the chair, to basically depose him as Speaker of the House, or at least to put that motion on the floor. Is that a scenario that you're preparing for?
Not at this moment, because we have to cross that bridge when we get to it. What's in front of us right now is making sure that when the legislation comes to the House floor tomorrow, it's successful. And we can send it to the Senate does its thing, and that we get a bill to President Biden's desk that avoids a catastrophic default. But here's why the extreme MAGA Republicans and the most extreme of the extreme, which is the group that you're talking about, Errol, here's why they're upset. Because from the very beginning, they had two objectives. They either wanted to jam these very deep, painful cuts to things like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid down the throats of the American people and use the hostage-taking situation to extract cuts that they know they could not otherwise achieve through the normal legislative process. That's Plan A. And then Plan B for them was to just force a default, let the economy crash, trigger a job-killing recession. And as many of them said publicly over the last week or two, they would benefit from the economy crashing politically in 2024. Plan A and Plan B. And the reason why they're upset is that because of President Biden's leadership, neither are going to happen. The economy is not going to crash. There will not be a default. And President Biden was able to aggressively push back against the types of cuts that they were trying to extract. And so now they want to turn their fire, apparently, on Speaker McCarthy. But again, Errol, you know, first things first in terms of what we're concerned about. And we've got to avoid this default, which means getting this bill over the finish line.
Okay. I mean, look, I went back and looked at what happened in 2011. And the reality is it was 72 hours before D-Day, before things got turned around. But It still resulted in a historic lowering of the credit rating of the United States of America, as well as a pretty serious slump in the stock market. The market seems to be doing okay for now, but this isn't necessarily going to be smooth sailing. What's the mood like there on Capitol Hill about the responsibility you all have collectively to make sure that we don't fall into a recession or depression, or that we don't double or triple the unemployment rate?
Well, on the Democratic side, we're committed to making sure we build upon the tremendous economic progress that President Biden and Democrats in the House and the Senate have been able to make over the last few years and not go backward. And so we have a resolve that we want to make sure that we don't default, that we get what needs to happen over the finish line, and that we can continue to work on building the economy from the middle out and from the bottom up. I do think the fact that both Leader Schumer, who has been tremendous throughout this process, and Leader McConnell said today that the bill is going to move through the Senate, that they both support the legislation, and that we will not default. And so we're going to be able to work this out at the end of the day, I believe.
Okay. Now, as for the Democratic base, some elements of which are not very happy about it, all of this, there are going to be limits on spending. There is going to be a rescinding of some of the COVID funding that had not been spent. The idea of expanding the capacity of the Internal Revenue Service to go after tax cheats, especially on the higher end of the income scale, none of that is going to happen. What's your answer to Democrats, including some who are watching right now, who are pretty unhappy about all of this?
Well, President Biden, I think, has done the best that he could under a very difficult circumstance. Now, in terms of the IRS funding issue, we've been assured by the administration that they do have the ability over the next several years to continue the types of enforcement and making sure, particularly tax cheats and the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected, some of whom try to avoid taxes, that the level of enforcement that is necessary will continue to occur over the next several years, and that any rescission of funding won't impact their ability to do what is necessary. At the same time, in terms of the spending cuts, what effectively has occurred is that the fiscal year 2023 spending numbers on the non-defense discretionary side, the things that people care about in terms of housing and public safety and nutrition and education, that will be flat. And then there will be an inflationary increase into the next fiscal year. But President Biden, from the very beginning, indicated that while he believes we should be investing more in the health, the safety, and the economic well-being of the American people, at minimum, we've got to hold spending where it currently is at. And effectively, that is the agreement that he was able to work out.
Okay. Well, that is life under divided government. We'll see how all of this plays out, I guess, program by program. Thanks so much for that update, and best of luck in making sure this happens safely in a way that protects the economy. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Errol. Great to see you always.